My dear community, welcome to my channel. My name is Wei-Jen, and I help people to attract the lifestyle and love they desire to have by expanding their awareness, self-love, and energy vibration. Today, the subject that I want to talk about is the healing power of forgiveness. So the reason that I want to dive into this topic is because I found out myself through the last many years in the past. I used to have a very hard time to forgive, particularly when it comes to my parents. I had a really hard time to forgive my parents. And for those of you, this is your first time getting to know me. I grew up in a dysfunctional alcoholic family. My father is a functional alcoholic, and my mother is an untreated severe codependent. And growing up with them as a child, I received lots of childhood trauma and wounds from them. My mother would, mentally, emotionally, and physically abuse me in many different ways, shapes, or forms. And I carried that with me through my whole, 20s and my whole teenagehood. Until the last couple years, I made a conscious decision that I was going to really started to tip my toes, into the water pot to started to work on, forgiveness on this aspect with my parents. Let's say that, not be able to forgive my parents definitely has cost me lots of consequences and pain and even suffered in my life. And I realized at some point, the pain wasn't tolerable at all to me. And that's where I started that I wanted to make a conscious decision to work on that. Although I didn't know at the beginning where or how I can start to work on forgiveness, because, in my point of view and my experience, I never felt that forgiveness is something that once I decided that I was going to forgive my parents, and then boom, I become suddenly or automatically, immediately, I become, forgiving to them. No, it took me many years and lots of awareness and a conscious decision to work on this part. So I want to share with you some of my tips, how I progress forgiveness towards to my parents to this stage where I feel I can truly feel that my body and my heart, my shoulder, my neck has become much lighter, and I don't feel that I am holding that grudges as much as before. So that is something that I want to share with you guys. Well, before we decided that we're going to forgive, people who hurt us in the past, I invited you all to think about what are the causes and the consequences that the hurt that you still carry on today, that still cause you some negative impacts or negative love syndrome in your life. And this can appear in your love relationship or your relationship with yourself. How has that impacted you? Your perception about the world, about your relationship with other people, about your career, or about your social circle, or your finance area, or your sexuality. Because when we carry that resentment or that wounds, especially childhood trauma or childhood wounds, into our adulthood life, there's actually a lot of impact and negative consequences that that will unfold based on the wounds or the trauma that we receive. If we don't release them, if we don't heal from that, it's going to carry on with us and impact in any ways, shapes, or form in our current life. And one thing that I want to say is how that has been impacting me is that one thing I remember, I used to be this victim. I used to put myself into this victim consciousness, especially when things didn't go well or didn't go the way that I wanted. Like, for example, if my relationship or somebody I was dating or I was seeing, right? And they did something that's very triggering to me, that evoke my childhood trauma or wounds, then I probably would start to not only be triggered, but also started to act it out and make a such big matter. And that definitely causes a lot of pain and fractions in my relationship with other people, because of the wounds that I didn't heal from that. And then today I realized that, one thing about forgiveness is that when I forgive my parents or other people who did the wrong thing to me, I intentionally and then I mainly forgive others for me and for my future, for my well-being and happiness and my freedom. So it's really actually is less about other people, but more about redirect that focus and that energy back to myself. So that way I can avoid and prevent putting myself into this victimhood. You see what I'm saying? And instead, I can still be strong and be powerful by choosing, how do I want to handle this wound, or when other people, they do something wrong to me, right? Do I want to fall into that? Or do I actually want to take it and make it, and make it to become my strength and to be more resilient? And that can look like, remove myself from that position or from that relationship that doesn't serve me any longer, right? That can look like setting a boundary with my parents. That can also look like by, expressing my needs, my standard, and my boundaries to other people, from, telling them that this is what I need, and this is my standard, and then this is my boundary. And so in that way, at least I get my messages out, and other people can have an opportunity to hear what I need from this relationship or what are my needs from them. And then regardless whether or not other people, they can meet our standards or our needs, that is completely, their choice and with their control. And then that is something that I have to always acknowledge and remind myself that I don't have the power to control other people the way that I want them to be. So that's one thing that I started to have this realization before I started to work on forgiveness. Now, the next tip that I really started to work on the forgiveness is through the visualization meditation. And I use this exercise to imagine that, let's say in this example, the people that I tended to have the most challenge and difficult to forgive them is my parents. So through this exercise, I imagine that my parents, both of them, they have their own inner child. And me, I also get to have my own inner child as well. So I would spend some time, closing my eyes and imagine my inner child, who is probably 12 years old or 7 years old, meeting either both my mother and my father, their 7-year-old or 12 years old. And through that visualization, I will allow and invite my inner child to ask my father and my mother's, their inner child, some questions. Questions can be like, why I will ask my father's inner child, why did you act or say or do, things in a certain way, which is not very healthy or out of the balance? That makes me feel hurt. I will be curious about that, and then basically ask questions from a place of curiosity instead of being judgmental or blaming or criticizing, right? So I will ask my father's inner child, why were you always so avoidant when I talk about love, or when I ask you to show me some affection or love, right? And through that process, I may not get everything that I needed to hear, or I may not get everything that I wanted or exactly clear answered through that visualization exercises. Sometimes my father's inner child or my mother's inner child would appear that they are not speaking anything or any words, and then they just have a facial expression, or there's no facial expression at all. And at that point, I have to remind myself that that is perfectly okay. There is nothing wrong with it. And all I needed to do is to be able to hold a space for both of us, for however or whoever the characters that in my visualization process, just to be able to simply hold a space for them and be there for them, be there for my inner child, and listen to what they have to say. If they're not saying anything, or my inner child doesn't say anything, just be there for them, be there with them. And I think, the process that I practice, the more that I practice it, the more I just create and generate more compassion and then love towards to my parents, their inner child. Because I gotta be honest with you guys, in the end of this process, I can see that the dialogue between my inner child and my parents, their inner child, is that I understand and I realize more than before that my parents, they were also growing up in a very dysfunctional family environment. As a child, they were supposed to get love, affection, protection from their parents, but unfortunately, they didn't, and it's not their fault. And so when I can see the environment they grew up, regardless whether or not it is real or unreal, right? One thing that I understand is that they also didn't have a role model to teach them, guide them, or even demonstrate to them how to be emotional available, how to love their kids in a healthy way. So, this is generation to generation, the way that we treat our kids. When our kids grows up, they will pretty much use a similar way to treat their kids, right? Unless they're very conscious and then do a lot of inner work with themselves, then there is a greater chance to break the negative patterns or vicious cycle. And so that is something that I experienced lately, is that I feel I had less resentment and anger and hatred towards to my parents. And instead, in the end of this exercise, the more that I do, I found out that my body becomes lighter, and I don't feel like I wanted to cry as much as like before when I talk about them. Instead, I feel more love, compassion, and forgiveness towards to myself and to them as well. And I empathize, the environment they grew up, their parents didn't give them a healthy love and affection as well. And so I empathize their childhood wounds. I empathize their experience. And I also feel more grateful about what I have, what I learned and discovered about myself, my journey. So that is something that I want to share with you guys. Now, the other thing is that I also did a lot of writing, journaling. I wrote down a lot about the dialogue between me and my parents. It's almost like a movie script. As you can imagine. I also wrote many different letters to my parents. Now, keep in mind, I don't send out or mail out or give any of these letters to either one of my parents because they're currently not in my life. So I just keep them with me. But I did that exercise pretty much a lot of times. Towards the end, I feel, I said everything that I wanted to say, whether it is, the things that I feel very angry about them or the things that I feel loved with them. I wrote it as a piece of letter and I just keep it with me. And I meditated with it. That's also very important for me in this process to forgive my parents. It's not easy, but it's definitely doable for everybody. And then, I think the most important thing in the end to keep in mind is that when I am working on forgiveness, I am doing it mainly for me, less for anybody else, and including wrongdoers as well. This is for me, for my journey, and for my freedom, for self-love, for awareness, for elevating my energy vibration, because it's not worth it for me to continue to carry these wounds or resentment into the next decade or next to 5 years, because it doesn't serve me. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind, is that in this journey, in this process, you're doing it for you, for yourself, not for anybody. And you're doing it for good. So that's all I want to say today. If you like my video and you found that my video is very insightful and helpful, feel free to subscribe my channel, leave a comment, even like my video, or share this video with anybody who who is currently seeking for help. And if you want to dive deeper into this personal transformation journey, feel free to even book a 30-minute discovery call with me to find out whether or not working with me is a right fit for you. Again, I want to thank you so much for spending your time watching my video, and I really appreciate your energy, your time, your presence on this channel. Thank you again, and I wish you have a fabulous day.